next video I wanted to watch with you guys was another Warhammer one from Bricky. I don't know if this is the last one he did of Warhammer that I was told to watch. I'll have to look later, but now I think there's like this is either the last one I gotta watch of Bricky, or there's only like maybe one or two left. I don't know. You guys would have to tell me. You guys would have to tell me. Yeah, what's the best Warhammer 40k faction / army to start with? So this is for noobs like me. Very noob. But I'm here to learn. Although we did establish in the last video, was it the last? Yeah, it was the last video. I watched that. Yeah, I'm hashtag team salamander. But yeah, if there's also not just Warhammer videos from Bricky you guys want me to either watch or react to, let me know. Let me know.
I must say the support on my prior Warhammer video has been, to put it lightly, absolutely outstanding. I've not had a video perform that well in maybe 3 to 4 years, and it's also a breath of fresh air to be able to make a video on something on a whim, on Warhammer, while very popular game, not a game that I ever really made videos on, and to have it perform as well as it does. You know, YouTube and the YouTube world doesn't like change very much, so it is incredibly heartwarming. But with that, it also came with a question.
The YouTube algorithm doesn't like it when you change things up on your channel.
Video, hey Bricky, what army should I play? So for this, my next major Warhammer video, I'm going to answer that question. I'm going to go over all different kinds of armies, just like we went with the main
I wouldn't mind a coffee right now, but
we're going to be going through the different various ways
it would either wake me up too much or put me right to sleep.
But how many models you're going to need, how new or old the model scopes are, and we're going to be going over the play styles of each army respectively. Are they melee? Are they shooting? Are they a little bit of both? Elite armies with only 20 models on the battlefield, or horde armies with 120 models on the battlefield?
The paint jobs on those look so fucking good.
What each army is about, and give you at least a decent run through of every single faction to allow you to make the conscious and intelligent choice on which army you want to play if you want to get into the tabletop of Warhammer 40,000.
Ooh, I still have some tea on me. That's actually a good idea as well. I got some tea with no caffeine in it, so I can just have some after this stream.
When I was contacted by Displate to sponsor this video, it was like an immediate yes. Anyway, I wanted to show you the ones I got because Displate is the sponsor for this.
Has anyone ever actually got a Displate? Anybody in the chat? Has anyone actually got one of these displays? Are they actually as good as advertised? Because I've always been interested in actually getting one.
It's a wonderful one from the Coen brothers, No Country for Old Men. This is probably my favorite movie of all time because I am a messed up human being. I like the dark, depressing shit. However, this one, I love it. It's very
really, we couldn't tell with these Warhammer videos.
Poster art that I tend to enjoy a lot. Now, past that, I actually got one for my mother because she is a huge Stephen King fan, so I got this fantastic Pennywise one to go along with it. And the third one I got actually was from fellow YouTuber vtuber. You may know him. He did Dark Souls content and, well, From Software.
Yeah, I've always wanted to actually get one, but I never have.
Because I wanted the big one of his. It is a absolute like gorgeous.
And I don't know anyone that actually has got one
in real life as I expected. Now, it come to my surprise that after I ordered 3 separate displays to go along with the sponsorship, I immediately receive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 extra ones and then change. And I kind of start realizing why they wanted a Warhammer video so much. Orcs, 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 orcs. Gotta have orcs. Sisters of Battle. We'll be talking plenty about them today. Angels of Death in all their glory. More Angels of Death in all their glory. And a Drukhari. I don't know what this is. Is it an Archon? It might be an Archon. I don't play Drukhari, but obviously.
To be fair, I wouldn't mind receiving this for free, and I'm still a Warhammer dude. So,
and especially for someone who was renting a place, and I know a lot of you have had those experiences with landlords where you try to hang up wall art, you put a nail into the wall, and they're like, "Oh,
fucking landlords!
Is that a 2mm hole I see right there? That's $300 out of your security deposit, kid."
Like some of the YouTubers that I've watched, sometimes they'll tell stories about like past shitty landlords. I can't remember which YouTuber it was. It's a while back, but they talked about, they were talking with another YouTuber about their past landlord horror stories, and for her it was like I think she got harassed by the landlord after she moved out. Like months after moving out. Landlord was still coming after her for shit. And she was like, "Sir, I don't live there. You're not my landlord anymore. Get away from me. This is harassment." Landlords get fucking wild. They're demented.
So thank you very much, Display, for sponsoring this video. I would highly recommend checking them out. They make absolutely fantastic stuff. So check them out, they're in the description, and let us continue with the video, starting off with a couple terminology we should learn before we actually get super deep into it. First things first, there's a thing called Forge World. Forge World is actually a lore thing with the Adeptus Mechanicus. However, what it is actually a partner to Games Workshop. Forge World makes these kind of custom minis that aren't in the codexes specifically. However, you can use them and field them in your games. They're just generally expensive, kind of a little bit weirder. They're a little bit more bizarre and sometimes like fan-made creations and such. But Forge World is like a side company of Games Workshop that makes 40K. I might mention them a few times. I wanted to go ahead and tell you about that. They're not used a ton, but they are something that you can use. Next, I want to tell you about hitting numbers. So if I ever say something like, this army hits on 3s,
I do love the
or
art
4s or 5s, what I'm saying is
and
if
the
they
look
hit
of
on
Warhammer,
3s,
just in
that
general.
means if you roll a d6 and you throw it out there, if you get a 3, 4, 5, or 6, anything 3 or higher, then you hit your shot. You've landed onto your target. If I say they hit on 4s, it's 4 and up, 5s, 5 and up, etc. And finally,
It's
we have things
fucked
called
up, Yomi,
stratagems. I'm
but
gonna mention
not
those a few
surprising.
times. Stratagems are like special abilities you can use after having a pool of command points that you get for building your army, and you can kind of dole those out, these special abilities, stratagems, as you wish. You ever played Command and Conquer, Red Alert 3, or perhaps Kane's Wrath? My personal favorite was always Kane's Wrath. You know those little abilities on the side of the map? It's like those. Let's start off with the #1 best army you should collect for a new player: Space Marines. Before we get into tactics, before we get into how they play, I want to remind you all of the most important rule, the golden rule.
I've noticed it's always coming back
Warhammer.
to the Space Marines.
You will always have a better time with the army whose lore you like and design you prefer. Always buy the army you think are the coolest. If you like undead Egyptian space robots that have enslaved gods as weapons, buy the damn Necrons. I don't care if Necrons are S tier or F tier, buy the damn Necrons, okay? If you love Viking aesthetic and you love Space Marines, get the damn Space Wolves. I don't care if they're S tier or F tier, get the army that you love the lore and the design of first. Nothing sucks more than playing a meta army that some people might not even want to play you against because you're going super power gamer and having to paint and create an army that you don't like. Play the army you think is the coolest. Golden rule.
To be fair,
okay, Space Marines. So the poster
to be
boys
fair,
of
that's what I
Warhammer
do
are our
anyway.
first faction today, and I know when I said that the best
like I don't
army to
care if
collect
it's
all
the
new
weakest one,
players
it's
are like,
so
oh God, not the
cute.
Space Marines, the generic ones, and all the veteran players are gonna say,
But I look
oh God,
badass
not
getting my
more
ass
Space
kicked.
Marine players I gotta deal with, and the tournament players are already ready to hire a hitman to kill me. But I'm sorry, I know, I agree, Space Marines are, whew, right now, but they really are the best army. If you are a new player, Space Marines are your best bet. They are the best army to collect if you are a new player, and let me tell you why. #1, Space Marines got all the lore. They got a monopoly on lore. They easily have the most fleshed out backgrounds of any of the characters or factions in Warhammer. Space Marines have the most books. Space Marines are a huge part of the Horus Heresy. Just Space Marines will always have the most, and they have the most depth to them. #2, Space Marines are very easy to paint, especially for new players. When you get Space Marines, you have a ton of variety of chapters, and they all have a ton variety of colors, and they're also pretty easy.
Good
Space
to know,
Marines are
because I
also
do
very large, or at least large.
Good to know, because I actually do want to get into painting them, because I don't know, not just Warhammer, but just painting like miniatures in general always kind of looked relaxing to me. I don't know. Anybody else? It's just not even doing it, but watching other people doing it. I was like, that seems oddly relaxing.
The normal, so
Good to know though that I should start with the Space Marines.
Armor, much easier to paint, especially their vehicles, and the paint schemes are easy. Ultramarines, blue, White Scar, white, Imperial Fist, yellow, Salamanders, green. It's extremely easy to paint Space Marines, and for a new player, I would highly recommend
videos.
them for that specific part, because
I gotta do that in the future.
Building is a massive part of this hobby.
Just have a Bob Ross day.
Marines are always getting new models. They are always getting equal attention from Games Workshop. Even if they've just been updated, they will get updated again and again and again. And the Harlequins and Dark
as long as you're
players are
having fun doing it,
but we don't care about them because I got a new Primaris Lieutenant and he's got a skull shield. I don't know. They're always getting new models, and while it might be a little excessive at times, they will always be updated and your rules will always be changing, and therefore it keeps it very fresh if you're interested in playing them. Number 4, you have a vast amount of data sheets and units at your disposal. See, in a codex, you have a part after all the lore of it, after some of the keywords and art pieces and stuff, you have the data sheet section where it goes over all of your units and what they do and their stats and everything, their special rules and so on. And when you get to that spot, however many units an army has depends on, well, you know, how many pages of data sheets is it. Take the Adeptus Custodes. They have a very small amount of units, and their standard codex of data sheets is only 11 pages long. Sisters of Battle, however, a little more medium force, they have 19 pages of data sheets. The Imperial Guard, they have a much, much larger amount of data sheets because they're such a large army. They have 39 pages of data sheets. Space Marines, 56 pages of data sheets for different kinds of units. It's a little bloated at times because of the amount of characters and stuff, but
just
still,
a little.
They are all over the place. Their variety is endless, and it is being even more updated and added as time goes on. Which brings me to number 5, and the most important of them all. Space Marines use every phase of the game. See, in Warhammer, there are phases in each turn. We're just getting into 9th edition, so we're getting something called the command phase soon, which is fine. But then we have the movement phase, psychic phase, shooting phase, the charge, fight, and then morale phase. Now, the last 3 are kind of all packed into one, if I'm being perfectly honest. But the main thing is that a lot of
this is definitely one of those. Warhammer is definitely one of those where you dedicate a whole ass day to play this game. Like, you can't just do like a quick game for like an hour. I have a feeling you have to dedicate a whole fucking day at least to get shit done. Especially if you're just learning.
Than expected. Grey Knights are very big in the psychic phase because they're all psychers, and so they really have a lot there. While Tau don't have any psychers, and they won't even use that phase, but they've got really damn good shooting. However, they don't have any melee, so they're not going to be using the charge phase, whereas, say, Slanesh Demons will use the charge and psychic phase plenty, but they won't be doing any shooting of, like, any kind, pretty much. The Marines, they will use every single phase, and you can't get good at the game and get good at the phases unless you're able to use all of them. And that's where Space Marines really shine. You can play them however you want in any kind of role. See, if you are running, let's say, an Iron Hands or Imperial Fist army, these are both shooting-based armies. But you can still
the Mass Effect
where if you wanted to play a
Renegade option like pops up somehow while you're playing Warhammer.
You still have good shooting units. You can still do plenty in the shooting phase. That's the most important part. Space Marines will use every single phase, and they are very, very good at it. So that is the main 5 reasons why you should be playing, or at least you should try collecting Space Marines. And I know I don't need more Space Marines in tournaments, but it is the best decision. They're good to paint, they're good to collect, they're always getting updated, they got tons of units, they use every phase, and you can tailor them however you'd like. Plus, and this is kind of down the line, but eventually after playing them enough, you might understand which army you'd want to collect second. if you start collecting a little bit of Space Marines, you start realizing, oh wow, I really think I'd prefer having more models on the table, or I wish I had tougher models. Then you can go for Tyranids or then Adeptus Custodians. It helps you figure out your second army a lot better. If you're a new player, you want to get interested in it, just do this. Go online, get yourself either, or check eBay, because there's tons of offhand Marine stuff on eBay. Get yourself a pack of Intercessors or maybe a tactical squad. I'd say Intercessors because they're more modern, they're newer and more meta, and they're bigger for better paint canvases. Put them together with some glue, get some paint on them, try them out, and try getting into the game that way. I think it'd be a pretty smart and a pretty solid idea to get someone new into the hobby, and Space Marines just really are one of the better choices.
I know when I do the whole starting to paint them myself and everything,
dick is your
I'm going for the cheapest option.
To the rest of the armies. And my personal favorite army at the current moment, the Imperial Guard, or the Estimataire, is fucking the Imperial Guard. The Imperial Guard are my main army. They are what is known as a gunline horde army. Whereas Orcs and Tyranids have a horde army that has shooting, but it's more melee based, the Guard is going to be running 60 to 100 infantrymen, support walkers, artillery batteries, aircraft, drop troops, tanks, bigger tanks. The Guard is all about just blistering firepower. Now, however, the downside to this is that the Guard, while well-trained, are only 4-up well-trained. They hit on 4s, and they also do not have very good survivability. Guard stuff tends to be rather fragile. They very rarely have any special saves to keep them from taking any damage. Most of their stratagems aren't based around survivability, but in fact more firepower. Guard don't shoot amazing with their 4-up accuracy, but they make up for that with just sheer amounts of numbers of shots. I don't care if my tank hits on
tanks,
4s
bigger tank,
when I've got fucking
bigger tanks.
If the Marines are like the pristine Swiss Army knife where they can do anything and they have a little tool for every situation, Guard are like a Swiss Army knife that's about 10 times as big and attached to a big wooden stick that you just beat the shit out of people with. Your units are squishy, they don't hit great, but you've got so many of them that you just take people out by drowning them in gunfire. As for collecting the Guard, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Their models are a bit older than I'd like. I personally think that they could use a decent amount of updates. They do get updated plenty rules-wise, but since they've got so many different kinds of units and so many Forge World options, a lot of them are a bit old and are showing their age. As for collecting them in the money side, they're pretty expensive. You're going for a horde army,
of course.
So you're gonna have tons of models on the playing field. That being said, I still do love them. I love their lore and their design. I love the large swaths of infantry, and I personally think they are pretty fun, if maybe not the greatest army as a main army. The Adeptus Mechanicus are the war cult of Mars. They are very weird, and I've been over how weird they are plenty before, but they are probably one of the wackiest armies in the game, maybe along with Gene Stealer cults. The Adeptus Mechanicus have a lot of really weird back and forth styles when it comes to their gameplay. They're mainly a shooting army. I'd say they're about 75% shooting, 25% melee. However, they do have a couple dedicated melee units that can hurt pretty bad, but they're much lower on the tier list compared to the amount of gunfire they can bring. They hit pretty well. They generally hit on 3s, sometimes 4s, depending on if they're using mechs or their own current bionics. But they do definitely have some of the wackier stuff. The entire army has a 6-up invulnerability save, so occasionally you get some pretty clutch moments when you start taking damage and you roll a couple dice and you get a couple 6s and you can shrug off like full-on missiles and stuff.
Nice.
So that's pretty cool. Like one of their base weapons is a really regular, kind of crappy carbine, but if you roll a 6 for it, it does double damage.
Just acting like a missile hit, it's like a mosquito bite.
Then you've got the
slightly
weird robots,
annoying,
like Castellan robots, that they are these giant like World War I mech dudes that have a refractor field, so if they block off shots with their, well, you know, reflector invulnerable save, it'll launch back damage towards the enemy, which can be kind of crazy. They're very strange. They definitely are quite strange. Much more shooting over melee, and definitely fun. It has some great looking characters. Belisarius Call might be one of the best models in the entire game. Super cool looking too. A bitch to paint though. Oh my god. And that does lead me to the
that does kind of look like it would be.
They're actually getting a lot more newer updates.
At least for the first couple of times, a bit annoying. Whoa.
Much more shooting over melee, and
YouTube, you okay?
It has some great looking characters. Belisarius Call might be one of the best models in the entire game. Super cool looking too. A bitch to paint though, oh my god. And that does lead me to the collecting of the AdMech part itself. They're actually getting a lot more newer updates lately. They're actually one of the newest armies as well. They came out only a couple years ago. All their stuff is in plastic and it looks really damn good. I personally think that they have some of the best aesthetics in the entire game. The only problem is that painting them is going to be a real bitch. I would recommend trying to do some of the simpler stuff, like maybe the Dune Crawler, before you get into things like Call or a Tech Priest Dominus, because wow, is painting that going to be really damn hard. Cost-wise, they are getting a bunch of new units, which is great, but generally when you get new units, they're very expensive, and whenever new stuff comes out, it tends to be a bit expensive.
The horse
army isn't a horde, but it's also not an elite army, so it
does have
when it comes to price range. However,
a badass
I would recommend
aesthetic.
them to people who like some kind of wacky antics and some weird abilities and weaponry, because AdMech is getting better and better.
Do
as time
not
goes
paint
on,
those
and they're pretty dang cool
when
to
I'm just
collect.
starting out.
Mid-tier price, maybe a little bit more expensive, but their scopes look great and they're very new, and I would highly recommend them. Next up, you've got the Adepta Sororitas, or also known as the Sisters of Battle, my second favorite army, though I will be honest, they are really coming up to overtaking the Imperial Guard. I love my Guard, I love my Cadians, I love my Tempesta Scions, but the Sisters of Battle, they're really cool. Not only from a lore perspective, they're just insanely religious, zealotous nuns. That already is just really dang cool. As for the tabletop,
like,
they're one of the
when I first started watching the Warhammer videos and learning about Warhammer, as soon as that was said, like these badass fucking nuns in space, I was like, sold. Because such a concept, such an idea, whether it's Warhammer or something else, badass zealot nuns in space. Come on now, come on.
Closest range armies in the entire game that isn't a full-on melee army. They're a slow-moving, like advancing gun line army with some actually horrifying melee units and just some like ridiculous close range firepower.
The dude in
the Sisters are
thingy.
probably one of the top 3 hardest armies to play, I'd say. They've got some really weird antics as well, kind of like AdMech, maybe not quite as wacky. This army can be played in almost any way as well. You can do this a full gunline army or a full melee army, or 50-50. Everything is viable. They do require a lot of finesse and manipulation, because these are all low toughness Sisters that do have good armor, but when you've got a low toughness like they do, and they're not necessarily the most powerful when it comes to the actual punching, they can actually be shot off pretty quickly. So you need to be really smart on how you maneuver them, because you've got a super short range, kind of squishy army at times.
We're talking about
a little bit challenging to get through. That being said,
religious
people
zealot
are
nuns in
sleeping
space
on the power of Sisters. Let me be the first one to say it. You are all sleeping on how strong this army is. This army, if played well by a smart person, will crush you. As for
Not me, but I'm still loving
Sisters are the most
crazy
recent
nuns in
army,
space.
at least as the time of making this video, who had a complete army overhaul. For a while, there were no plastic sister models whatsoever, but the entire army, besides I think one unit, got a full overhaul of models. Everything is brand spanking new, and they probably have the best looking models in the entire game, in my opinion. They look incredible. That crazy gothic, kind of Catholic nun look. I mean, come on, their tank is a pipe organ missile launcher. It's a pipe organ missile launcher.
That thing.
Sisters
I remember
are one of
seeing
the
that
coolest looking
in
armies in the entire game.
another
They are a bit
video.
expensive though. That's the one downside.
Of course they're
because
expensive.
This entire army is brand new. It
Is there such a thing as cheap
so
Warhammer?
I personally love them. They might soon become my favorite army. I can't quite tell yet. They look great. They're a little expensive to collect. They have lots of different kinds of abilities, both melee and shooting. No psychic phase, but they do have some shenanigans to stop other people from using the psychic phase. They're pretty cool, but they are really hard to play, and they take a lot of practice. So kind
Yeah,
of up to
honestly,
you. I would say not a very good starting army, but they are pretty neat. All right, Grey
honestly,
Knights.
I would
heard
get
you
him
like
just for the
psychic phase. If you
aesthetic and the
like
fact that it's
psychic phase, this is the
fucking
psychic
nuns in
phase for you.
space.
Grey Knights are Space Marines X2. They're super mega duper elite Space Marines that are all psychers. They're nuts. Grey Knights are insane. They are very, very elite. However, you have probably like maybe 40% fewer models than an average army will have. All of your dudes, however, are scary in their own right. They all hit very well on 3s minimum. They all have great armor. Since they're all psychers, they're really good at dealing with other psychers. They also have great shooting and very strong melee. All of your guys have extremely powerful melee weapons. The only downside to Grey Knights is that any anti-psycho shenanigans can really harm them, and you are running an elite army with very few models. When you run very few models, that means every time you're rolling and you roll those ones, it hurts that much more.
I can't tell if I like
Grey
the
Knights, so they
helmets
have
or
this
not.
awesome kind of old school knight round table aesthetic with them all carrying things like halberds and falchions. They've got holy text and they carry books around and flags, but they do get to use every phase as well. Lots of psychic, and then they're shooting and a ton of melee as well. Mainly psychic and melee. In terms of buying them, they're not too
I don't know
bad,
why,
actually.
but
they're probably
the
one of the cheaper armies as well, because
let me see if I can. Right there where it says Titan on the crotch area, all I could think of was like, you know, those big fucking belt buckles, like especially when they got really popular, just these big fucking belt buckles that people would start wearing everywhere, just saying either nonsense or some type of cuss word or something, and it just is so stupid. It was so stupid. I loved it though because it was cringe. That's
melee,
I'm sorry,
in
that
terms of
popped into
buying
my
them,
head
they're
when
not
I
too
saw
bad,
that.
Actually, they're probably one of the cheaper armies as well, because when you're running an elite army, not as many models on the tabletop, so it's a lot easier to fill out your entire army by only purchasing many or fewer boxes than normal. As for their scopes, I don't know exactly how new they are. I wouldn't call them very new. I call them like middle ground when it comes to how old they are. They're not super old, but they're not necessarily super new either. That being said, if they are, say, medium old or whatever, they do look great. I love the way the plastic models look. I think they look fantastic, and I would recommend trying them out if you like a psycho-heavy Space Marine thing. You play Space Marines and you're like, wow, I like the psychic phase. Grey Knights. No competition. Infantry is for losers. It's big mech boy time. If I'm being honest though, the Imperial Knights, I wouldn't recommend them. I'm just gonna come out and say it. I don't think Imperial Knights are a very good army for a new player. They are one of the cheapest armies you can buy because while each knight in its own right is very expensive, you only need 3 or 4 to fill out an entire game's worth. And compare that to a full army, they're actually not too bad, like price-wise. The problem with Knights is that, as cool as they are, they want to use the Psyche phase. They have plenty of shooting, though, plenty of shooting, and they can have some really great melee. But when you're playing Imperial Knights, you're not really playing 40k. A great friend of mine said, if you're playing Imperial Knights, you're playing chess, but you have about 6 queens against a normal enemy chess player. If the enemy chess player is smart, they can easily beat your 6 queens. I'm sure it'll be pretty simple for them to use their full arsenal to beat you. But if the enemy chess player is a noob, for instance, then there's a good chance that they're not going to be able to win, and you'll just kind of noob stomp them. And that's what Knights are. Knights are generally
when you bring a nuke to a gunfight,
more like just a middle tier army. They're not good for
you
new
over there
players
with a
because
pea
they don't
shooter.
really teach you the game, and it's not the way the game is.
The other player whips out a fucking nuke out of their asshole,
so to speak. I got nothing against Knight players. If you're a Knight player, it's totally fine. If you run a Knight Valiant, you have nothing but my respect. All right, get that Knight Valiant, 2-up armor, 4-up invul, Trader's Pyre. Oh, you can't have both. Just have Trader's Pyre.
There's gun chests on Steam.
All right, but honestly,
I didn't know that, but at the same time, that doesn't surprise me. Weirdly enough,
great painting projects. However, if you just want to paint something, definitely pick up a Knight for that. They look great. You're not really playing 40k when you play Imperial Knights. You're playing a kind of a weird hybrid of it. If anything, get a normal army like say Imperial Guard or maybe some Space Marines, and then buy one big Knight and throw it into your army as an ally. That would be the way to do it, I'd say. I think they're better as a supplementary character as opposed to a main army or force. This is also same for Chaos Knights as well. They do look really cool, though. They do look really cool. Golden Boys.
Yeah,
Golden Boys.
if nothing else, I would get it for the aesthetic.
This is probably one of the most elite armies you could possibly play. These guys are nuts. They hit on 2s or higher in shooting and melee. They have triple the health of a normal Space Marine. They have a better armor save than a normal Space Marine. They all have invulnerable refractor fields around them, which most armies do not have. They're tougher than Marines. They get to reroll 1s in the shooting and melee phase when a certain captain is near them, which means they're hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s. You absolutely murder people in melee. You've got some okay shooting. Your shooting is hit or miss, but your melee is insane, and you use about 20 models. They are literally the definition of Chad Thundercock, okay? Chad Thundercock, if that was a human being, it would be a custodian. Okay? The problem is that you only have 15 20, 25 models in your entire army. It is absolutely crazy how powerful these guys are, but they do pay the price for it. That being said, when it comes to collecting them, they are one of the cheapest armies you can buy. Because they're so elite, you don't need as many things to purchase, you don't need as many models to have on the field, so buying custodians is much cheaper than your average army. It's an elite army, and also they're much easier to paint, in my opinion, because they're so big, because they're like 2 feet taller than a Space Marine, lots of a big canvas for your painting, and they're almost all gold. Gold isn't that hard to paint, I wouldn't say. So they're good for painting, they're not very expensive. I would say they're not bad at beginner army, if I'm being honest. They're pretty cool.
So
they have a nice
that's one of the ones for
to them, but as an elite army,
beginner painting as well.
Roll, it's gonna really hurt. So that's something you should be worried about, or warned about at least. They are pretty neat though. I'm not going to touch on the Assassins, Sisters of Silence, or Inquisition too much because
sure.
they're not
I like
really
their helmets,
an actual
though.
army.
There's
the
some
Assassins are really damn cool. There's 4 of them, and you can pick one to add to your army as you see fit. They all have different things they do and specialize in.
Oh, they look so badass.
Clear, a kind of confusion specialist, and an anti-psyker character. Cool. Their scopes are really nice, and since they're only single characters, not too expensive, but you really can't make an army out of them. They're more of a supplementary character. The Sisters of Silence just recently got an update to allow you to field them with custodians, which is awesome and super cool, and is actually kind of a big part of them because the Sisters of Silence are big anti-psyker, but they only have maybe 2 kits, 3 kits in their entire army, and that's about it. They're not really worth collecting in their own right.
I don't know about the hair thingy on top of their head, but the rest of them look badass. A whole
bunch of just little characters, basically. A whole bunch of named characters with the cool abilities, which are neat, but not really something that I would try to get a whole bunch of. Look at all 3 of those things after you're already starting collecting another army, and you're like, hey, I kind of want an assassin. Throw an assassin in there. Unless you're playing custodians, then check out the Sisters of Silence, because the custodian's biggest weakness is psychic, and the sisters do a great job at cutting that down. All right, let's move on to chaos. So we got a chaos demons. Chaos demons follow one of 4 gods: Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, or Slaanesh Big Titty. With Slaanesh Big Titty, you're going for melee and fast. You are all melee. You've got no shooting. You got good psychic spells, but you're running in there at Mach 5.
Slaanesh Big Titty.
Papa Nurgle is slow but tanky as hell. Tzeentch, a little bit in between, but tons of psychic spells. Khorne, no psychic.
Khorne.
Melee hits like a truck. Pretty much all of the Chaos Demon factions are glass cannons and very heavy into melee. You got some good psychers for about 3 of the 4, because Khorne I don't think has any. So there is still plenty of variety in there, but what you're doing is you got a whole bunch of big glass cannon demons that run up and just break your face. That's Chaos Demons in a nutshell. They all have their various traits. Slaanesh is fast and hits a lot of times. Nurgle is tanky. Tzeentch is psyker. Khorne hits really hard. Pretty simple in that sense.
And about 90% of them usually have tits out and tongue waggling
by themselves. You would ally them in with things like Chaos Space Marines, which we're going to be talking about in just a moment. But as an army in their own right, don't try to make a demon army, I wouldn't say. They don't teach you a ton of the game, and they're a little bit limited because you have to stick with one Chaos faction normally. If you want to ally in multiple things, you're probably going to need some Chaos Space Marines to go along with it. And with that, let's talk about that. Chaos Space Marines, you're kind of getting the butt end of Games Workshop. They don't really seem to like you, Chaos, that much. I don't know why. A lot of your models aren't very new.
Being called out.
And a lot of them are expensive, and your rules aren't that great. most of the time, with the exception of something that happened in 7th edition with Chaos Demons, apparently. I heard it was a very, very strong codex. Chaos Space Marines are very similar to regular Space Marines, but they're much more focused on melee combat. You still have shooting, and
The
it depends
emo
on
boys.
which faction you're going through as well.
The
But
Gothic
while you
style.
do have your shooting units, it is generally more melee-based, I'd say. Demons in their own right, and Chaos in their own right, want to run in there and start breaking face. That's generally their MO. As for Chaos Space Marines, it depends on what Legion you're joining, but overall, there are a ton of different ways for you to go ahead and get about completing your objective. The Death Guard and the Thousand Suns, I believe, are the most fleshed out. They both have their own codexes. They both have their own special units, especially Death Guard. Death Guard is very recent, and both of them allow you to field a Primarch, which might be one of the coolest parts about them. You can run Mortarion or Magnus the Red, both gigantic, beautiful models that are just awesome.
Yeah,
showpieces to have.
again.
They get shot a lot, but once they get into combat,
Like, look-
oh man, do they cause.
Like, look, even if you didn't want to use them in the game, aesthetically alone, you would get these. Look at that. Also, I love I love the fucking horn nipples over here. Every time I see that in a Warhammer picture, it's fucking horn nipples.
That's a problem. As stated before, you should be building what you'd like, of course. What you enjoy is the most important part of it. But as for Chaos, it's really, you gotta like melee combat, and you gotta like different kinds of allying, probably. I'd say Demons aren't, or not Demons, but Chaos in general, isn't a great faction to start off with as a new player, because you need to understand the intricacies of how to do army building and knowing what you're running a little bit more prevalently. And so I'd wait on doing anything Chaos related, at least until they get a solid update. Or
It sounds like
someone
doing that
teaches
is
you,
more
or you
like
get a little more into the
when-
hobby. With the exception of
when
Death
you've started
Guard. I think
learning the
Death Guard
game
is in a
and
good place for a new player, because Death Guard is
you
pretty
feel
cool. But
comfortable and you
besides
want to
that,
challenge.
they're a little tough. Okay, let's talk about some Xenos, starting off with the Space Elves, the Eldar. So the Eldar are
Oh my god, the
definitely
fucking
a
cone
more
heads.
glass cannon-y kind of style
I
group.
forgot about that for a
They are
second.
the first Xenos race
The
we're talking
fucking
about,
cone
and there are a
heads,
couple
here they
versions.
are.
There's also the Drukhari and the Harlequins. However, the Eldar, they are strike hard, strike fast, and get out of there immediately. So the thing about Eldars, what would happen is they would fly out of somewhere, immediately gun down with extremely high power weaponry, hitting on threes.
So
with
far,
some kind of
aesthetically,
BS stratagems, if I'm being honest, and then they can
they're
zip
kinda my
back
least
into
favorite,
cover
I'm not
and
gonna
really
lie.
annoy you. Honestly, Eldar probably have some of the more powerful
Just not my style.
shenanigans when it comes to the game. They have lots of weird rules. Their stuff hits extremely
For certain
hard,
things, I mean.
But of course,
Like the
once you
fucking
fire
cone
back
head
at
thing.
them,
I
if you
can't
live,
unsee
they
it.
will crumble under a slight breeze to an extent. If you play Eldar, you won't be making a bunch of friends, if I'm being honest. I'd say Eldar are top 3 most aggravating enemies to fight against. People don't like fighting Eldar a whole lot. Myself included, I find them to be quite aggravating. But if you're that kind of person who likes zip in, zip out, and be all kind of trickery and sneaky, they're definitely the army for you. They're definitely more shooting and psychic based. That's the 2 main things. They've got some good melee, but mainly shooting and psychic based. As for collecting Craft World Eldar, I'd say they got some good sculpts. Some of their models look pretty good. They got some nice plastic. A few of it's a little bit older, but you don't need a huge army. So when it comes to the money side of it, not too bad. I'd say the financials for it are pretty dang solid, and I wouldn't call them an expensive army to collect, at least not from my knowledge. The Dark Eldar, or the Drukhari, are like Eldar cranked up to 12. They're faster, they can hit harder at some points, and they have
They're
really good
edgier
melee
cone
units.
heads.
Their melee units can actually be really scary, but they are also
Cone
doubly
heads with
made of
spikes.
paper. They're also a lot harder to play. They're probably top 3 hardest armies to play, along with the Sisters of Battle. And that actually goes on to the Harlequins as well. Harlequins are an army that just don't collect Harlequins, if I'm being honest. They're not a great choice. They have barely any models, and they're really weird, and they have a lot of shenanigans if you want to pull them off. If you're a new player, I would not recommend Harlequins at all. Dark
Got it.
Eldar, and Harlequins, speedy, made of paper, hit like absolute trucks, and not too expensive, I wouldn't say. Drukhari, I think, is a little bit more expensive than the other two, but not too pricey because you don't field a ton of units in your armies. Moving on, we got Tyranids, bugs. Yeah, got bugs. You gotta love those bugs. So many bugs. Now, Tyranids obviously are a horde army. It should be very obvious. They are also a melee horde army. Whoa, I know, call the presses. You are mainly spending your time in the melee phase,
tongues.
as well as some of the psychic phase. You got a lot of good psychers in the Tyranids army, funny enough. You've got some pretty involved and advanced bugs. And your melee phase is as it seems. You have really gigantic, gargantuan creatures that eat everything alive, or you've got 40,000 little boys that eat everything alive. You do actually have some somewhat good shooting too with your Exocrine and your Hive Guard. You can put out some pretty decent shots. They are definitely the kind of army you run if you want big swaths of just these angry little running bug dudes that just swarm on your enemy. It's literally called the Tyranid Swarm. As for price-wise though, I'd say they're actually very, very expensive to collect. Their scopes are some are a little bit older, but not all of them. They're a little bit in between when it comes to the actual date release for their scopes. I'd say they are a bit older, though they are expensive.
Yeah, they look disgustingly
and you're running a horde army, so that's definitely
amazing.
one of the top more expensive armies to collect because, come on, tons of bugs, tons of models, and older scopes. Can be a little bit of a challenge. Gene Stealer Colts. You want to play bugs, but you want to play human bugs with scrotum heads. Gene Stealer Colts are a very new addition.
We're not going to kink shame on this channel.
They run this almost as weird as AdMech style army. They're very fast, they hit really hard, and they like dip underground, they crawl from underground, they hit you with very powerful short-range weaponry and super strong melee attack, and then they kind of run away and they like zip, hit and run tactics. That's probably the best way to do it. Hit and run tactics, they come out of the ground, they spook you, they do a bunch of damage, they run away, they got some weird psychic spells here and there, they run these like makeshift Mad Max trucks and stuff. They definitely have a unique play style. They deploy strangely, they like to zip around the place kind of strangely, and they definitely are one of the more unique armies there are. Would I recommend collecting them? No. They kind of fulfill a niche, but they're not that like overarchingly special, I'd say. I don't know what the word is exactly, but they are
he's trying so hard not to kink shame right now.
For a very specific player. If you're running Tyranids, you might consider doing Gene Stealer Colts, but at that point, you already kind of know what you're doing, so I don't think I recommend this to a new player. Gene Stealer Colts and Tyranids both a little bit rough to recommend to a new person because they are very expensive, both of them. And while the models for Gene Stealer Colts are definitely a lot newer and that's much nicer, they need practice. They are definitely a harder army, and I would recommend waiting on those if you're a new player. Orcs. Orcs.
Orky boys! Orc boys.
Orcs.
Here they are.
I would say orcs are great if you like the horde army and you like having RNG dictate your life. So orcs hit on 5s, as I mentioned in my last video. However, if you roll a 6, you get to make another attack with the weapon. Everything from the little pistol to the giant rocket launcher. You can have a rocket launcher that fires 3 times, and if you get lucky enough, you can have it fire 5 times. But the main thing that you're probably going to be jumping with orcs for is the giant green tide, because their melee ability is pretty humongous. They have very weird gunfire. They got their weird weapons and their strange rules, the DACA rules to allow them to get all these extra shots. And they can even have some pretty dang good shooting with things like shock attack guns and DACA jets and stuff. If orcs hit on 5s and shooting, they hit on like 3s in melee. Orcs love to beat the hell out of each other. So it's very obvious that once they get into melee, they'll just start pounding on you because they are really good at hitting stuff. In fact, I might be speaking a little bit too hyperbolically when I say RNG controls your life with orcs. Or RNG controls your shooting, but your melee is actually pretty dang good. They've got a special ability called Here We Go, which allows them to re-roll their charge dice, which is a very rare thing and extremely powerful buff. Getting into melee has never been easier if you're an orc. As for collecting orcs, expensive. Probably the most expensive horde army there is. Probably more expensive than Tyranids or Guard or anything in between. They have scopes that are sometimes new, sometimes very old. You can have cool new models like Gazkul Thraka, but then you got a whole bunch of really damn old orc models because orcs have been around forever. Their codex in their own right is pretty neat, and there's some pretty good models in there, but orcs just, they're showing their age, and you need a shitload of them. and they are very
Oh, yeah,
expensive
work.
for that reason. So they're expensive to collect, and you need a ton to
Hopefully
collect
not
a
too many
good-sized
people
army.
bothering you.
But playing them, if you like melee with some really fun shenanigans and a bit of RNG, I can see why
I
someone would
understand,
like orcs,
Phoenix.
because
I
they're
understand.
orcs. Come on, they're just,
The thirst
they're
is real.
great. Let's talk Necrons.
The thirst
so the
is
Necrons,
real.
if I had to pick a Xenos army, I'd play Necrons, honestly. Necrons, I mean, they're just so cool. Undead, Egyptian, skeleton robots that carry enslaved gods into battle. How is that the coolest thing ever? So Necrons are fittingly named blah blah necromancy, but not like the undead homina necromancy, but like necromancy through metal. So the way Necrons are is that they are kind of a slow moving, at least some of their units slow moving, gun line with some mixed in melee units. Not all their army is melee, but their melee units that they have are actually like really scary. But for a while, Necrons are kind of slow.
Oh, you were able to get the one with the
Terminator-style
statue?
guys that
That's
just
pretty damn
blast you
cool.
away at a distance with some very powerful weaponry. They kind of have Space Marine stat lines, actually. They run about as many models as Space Marines. They got similar stat lines and similar weaponry.
Yeah, I
I'd
have
say
a
that
feeling
they're
these
actually
would
quite
probably
similar to
be one
Space
of your
Marines in
mains.
terms of how they play. But they actually do have a lot of weird shenanigans that make Necrons their own. For instance, the main thing that you might want to pick Necrons for is their reanimation
like their
protocols.
aesthetic.
Special ability that, let's say you got 10 units of your base Necron unit, warriors, for instance. You got 10 Necron warriors.
I love how I
your
just keep
basic troop
repeating
choice.
aesthetic.
Your opponent feels like it's a 7.
They
Feels
look
7 of them.
good.
You got 3 of them left. Their turn ends, your turn starts. You then roll a dice for every dead
Nice,
model.
Phoenix,
So
nice.
7 models, 7 dice. And for every 5 or higher, you automatically get one of your models to just stand right back up. Your Necron just goes like your vehicles regenerate health as time goes on. You have special abilities
You
to
be
maybe
cracking them
make your
bones
Necrons
and
come back on
sitting
a 4
right back up.
instead of 5. You can re-roll your 1s for it.
Popping
It's
like
all
a
about
Rice
getting your
Krispie
units
treat.
to come back up and being like, if you're fighting Necrons, you better kill it. Because if you leave it wounded, it's going to repair itself.
The
and that's
gay
not a
mecha
very
show?
good thing. That's the idea of
They weren't
Necrons.
lying,
They got
it's
good
really
shooting,
gay.
they got good melee, and honestly, now is a good time to be a Necron player. They are getting a massive update right now. This is right before 9th when this video is coming out, and they are getting huge new model ranges, a ton of just new units in general, massive updates, rule updates. Necrons are getting big additions, and I think it's going to be super great. Now is a good time to be a Necron player. The new stuff might be a little expensive to collect because it is new stuff. That being said, they're not an elite army, but I guess they can be played an elite army if they wanted to. But
Yeah,
they
seriously,
don't have a
even
few
if-
models,
even
they don't
if
have too
you
many models, they're nice in between, and now is a damn good time.
Don't
want to
play as some of these, just from the looks alone,
is for
collecting
people who
them
wanna
would be
gun
worth
their
it.
opponent down with the most sci-fi hardcore Gundam giant mech stuff you can think of. You want to have your entire enemy obliterated off the board through just the unrelenting volley of railgun shots and rail rifles and fusion blasters. You will look up and you will see missiles, giant homing missiles blot out the sky as it rains down on your army because the Tau player's got 40,000 missile pods on all of his characters. He's got flying drones to fire laser sights to mark them, to have better accuracy, to block shots, and your big battle suit will be rolling up and then a drone will come in and block a missile from it. The Tau are definitely more of an Eastern inspired, definitely a Gundam kind of look to them.
Over here be calling down the Warhammer version of a Titan.
And they also have tons of special abilities to stop your opponent from getting to you in the charge phase. The Tau has no melee. Their melee is straight garbage. When Tau infantry start punching, it means they've lost.
Why?
might
When you
think
can
to yourself,
explode
wow,
with a
Bricky, this
hellfire
sounds
missile.
great
See?
and
Yeah.
aggravating. Yep, that's about right. The Tau get a lot of shit. Some of it warranted, some of it not so warranted. The models in their own right definitely don't fit very well with 40k. They're much more of a sci-fi Gundam style thing compared to a gothic, grimdark sci-fi fantasy.
Well,
however, I do think they do look pretty cool.
to be
in
fair,
their
I
own
like
right.
them
It's
better
kinda
than the
weird in this
Coneheads.
universe. But when you've got an entire army whose whole job is to blast you away from incredible ranges across the map, and every time you even try to retaliate, they either gun you down when you try to charge, or they block your shots with drones.
Do I have that in my reward
It can be
thing?
pretty aggravating. That being said, there
You
are
can tell
really
I haven't
cool
paid
new
attention
ways to play Tau, like close
my Twitch
range
thing.
attacks with Cold Star battle suits and the
while.
Farside enclaves, which, by the way,
I
if
think
you
that's
ever
just
use
when
a
I'm
Cold
playing
Star
like
battle
a
suit, or a Cold Star
multiplayer
Commander,
game.
I suppose, or a Yavara, you have my respect.
Like,
so you do have different options when it comes to Tau instead of just sit back and fire, but you definitely don't got much
when we
melee.
would play all the time, like
You
Overwatch
definitely
and
don't got much
Apex
melee.
and stuff.
You suck at melee. But if you just
So I
wanna
guess if I ever
gun
play a
people
multiplayer
down
game
and
with
the only phase you care
different
about is the shooting phase, you don't care about psyche, you don't care about
characters
melee, you
to
just wanna
choose from.
blast people, Tau is definitely for you. As it comes for collecting them, their scopes are pretty good. They're not entirely super new, but they do look great. They have a whole bunch of different kinds of mechs, big and small. They got drones, big and small. They got infantry units and everything. They do look solid, high tech, and their scopes do look nice. They're also, I'd say, not too expensive. You don't need a ton of them, and the battle suits themselves are expensive for each box, but you only need so many of them because they are very expensive when it comes to the points cost in the game. So Tower on the middle level of the expensive tier.
Yeah,
that was a lot
their
of
looks
talking right there. That
don't blow my
covers it,
mind
though.
away,
That
but
is
again,
every army in 40K for you
pretty
trying to
decent
figure out
looking,
which
and
army you want to play.
like I said, the
will
cone heads.
reiterate, Space Marines, they are the best. I know it kind of sucks for some of us, but trust me, they are the best. I would highly
Overwatch 2
recommend
is
if you're
getting
trying to get
huge
into it,
change.
get a
Yeah, I
box of
bet it fucking
Intercessors,
is.
Check out the rules.
Again.
Clean them up maybe. 9th edition is coming very, very soon.
a
It
lot
looks
in Apex,
extremely
too.
promising, and I think now is probably the best time to be jumping into
huge
this
change
hobby.
being getting
I want more
deleted.
people to be a part of this community, to be a part of this fandom. I think it is exciting. I think it has a little something for everyone.
Yeah,
but
I'm
I don't
excited
want
to be in
anyone
the
at
to
all
learn
to
about the
not feel
Warhammer
welcomed,
community.
not on any basis, not on basis of age, sex, gender, race. I don't give a shit, okay?
So far,
I don't care
I'm
who you are.
enjoying
I
this-
want you to at least give it a shot and be a
this
part
Warhammer
of this
journey
group with me, because I would always love
of a
new
lot of
people.
lore,
And honestly,
a lot of blood
there's
and
no
guts,
reason why you shouldn't have a good time along with the rest of us. So
a lot of
thank you so
horny
much for watching
tatas.
this video, everybody. It was a pleasure having you here.
Slytherin
Check out this
tongues.
plate in the description, please. They are the wonderful sponsor for today's video, and they were actually quite wonderful to work with as well. And plus, with so much Warhammer stuff, I'm sure you can find something that you can definitely decorate your wall with for a decent price as well. As for me, my name has been Bricky. I have a Patreon if you'd like to support me. As you can see, all the names flying up on the screen right now. These are all the people on the $10
Man, I wonder
or
how
up
much stuff
tier
they got on
who decided
display
to help
now,
support
because
me on my videos. You are all absolutely wonderful.
When it
I
was
wanna give a
first, like,
special
became
shout out to
popular,
my
Displate
top 3 patrons
already
currently,
had a bunch
which
of
are
shit you could get
Big
on there.
Papa Nerds, which is so fitting for today.
gotta be in the
Drunken
billion
Legends,
gajillions
the
now.
Absolute crazy Texas man, and of course Krieg the Psycho,
The really
which is a
horny
wonderful
faction.
Borderlands reference. The 3 of you,
No one's
you are on the
surprised,
top
Phoenix.
tier for Patreon,
Absolutely
and I really
no
do
one.
appreciate it. I wouldn't be able to make this many videos without you guys, and it is wonderful having you here. And I see you on the Twitch stream all the time, so I know you guys. I know you around. It's good. I'll see you soon.
Toss it between the
Besides
robot
that,
clans
if you
and the
want to check out my Twitch
orcs.
stream, I stream multiple
Fair.
times a week. Is in the
Fair.
description. I would love to have you there. We can talk a little bit Warhammer or anything.
Yeah,
in between,
like-
just play some
like I
games.
said, I'm-
And finally, if you're interested in copying some merchandise like the one I'm wearing, or
Hashtag
maybe just
Team
get a little bit of
Salamander.
bee stickers
Those are my-
up in your world.
So far from
that
what
out
I'm
too.
learning,
All right, I don't know if I'm gonna make.
I
next.
love the
Might be a league
Salamander,
one, but I might hop
Space
on the more 9th
Marines
edition stuff when 9th edition
peoples,
comes out. Perhaps I'll even
dudes.
make a video on how to play it. But until then, thank you so much for watching. My name has been Bricky, and the Emperor protects.
but the rest
Bye-bye.
so far from what I'm learning lore-wise, it's mostly gonna be how badass I think they look. And apparently, I'm being told by the Warhammer community that is what you're supposed to want to play as. If you think they look badass, if you enjoy the lore, how awesome they look, all that good stuff, then play as them. So I will. But yeah, so far, still salamanders are my faves. But the more I learn, the more I can see like a list forming. So it'll be interesting when I actually not only learn how to play Warhammer itself, but actually get into painting miniatures. I'm actually looking forward to it. Even if it sounds hella expensive.